Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whatever. Welcome. I'm here to present a new book which has been organized and edited by Leah Kent and myself. The book is called The Dead as Martyrs, Ancestors and Heroes in Timor-Leste. This book came out of the Euroseas conference, which was held a few years ago. It always takes a little time to organize the proceedings of a conference, and in this instance, we added several more people to the collection. Not only the people who were able to come and participate in our conference panel, but we did go over and extended the number of participants. All in all, this book has got about 320 pages. It has got a very nice preface by Elizabeth Robb. We thank Elizabeth very much for her magnificent presentation of our book. Then Lee and myself wrote an introduction, a lengthy introduction to the book. And the substance of the book is divided in three parts. First, Susanna and Michael have written two introductory chapters. One focusing on ancestorship, the question of ancestorship. What's the relationship between the dead and the ancestors, and what is the relation between the living and the ancestors? The second chapter in this part one is Remembering the Martyrs of National Liberation in Timor-Leste by Michael Leach. So Michael looks at the way in which the martyrs are important to the building of national identity and the nationalist narrative. These two actually frame what the book is all about. The book then has got 11 more chapters. Alessandro Burkait, Bronwyn Winch, Damien Granville, Victoria Sakti, Andre Damaledo, and Soren Blau are in the first part. They all talk about this very important trait of Timorese culture, the place of the dead in the life of the living. Then the last part, if you can move it a little bit, yes. The last part is the dead and the nation state. Why are martyrs considered heroes? What is the importance of being an hero and relationship between martyrs and heroes? And then we have Amy Rothschild, Henry Mirtinen, myself, Leah Kent, and Kate Roll. That's all we have in the book. But to know a little more about what the book is about, we have invited our dear friend Andrew McWilliam. He has sent us a recorded presentation. So let's give the floor to Andrew and thanking him very much for accepting to present this book.
Rui, nós ouvimos um pouco mal a última parte, mas eu vou agora interromper e colocar o vídeo, está bem?
Exatamente, é isso mesmo, é isso mesmo.
Ok. O Andrew, entretanto, eu já reparei que ele já está, mas se calhar ele depois falará a quando das perguntas e questões, se houver, está bem?
Andrew, it seems that you are here, boy.
Rui, hi, Rui. Yes,
Wow.
it seems.
Well,
I got the timing wrong, so I decided to come anyway.
Okay. Thank you for surviving this late night.
Estão a ver o ecrã escuro neste momento?
Yes.
Vou começar, está bem? I'm going to share it now, okay? Sorry. just going to interrupt just to check something, because when I share it, I should have made a particular spot here. Yeah, share the sound of the computer and to optimize this. Okay, now it's okay.
And good afternoon. I apologise for not being able to appear live for this book launch, but being based in Sydney, Australia, I'm not very coherent at 1 o'clock in the morning, which is what the time would be. So the recording is my contribution here. And my task is to give some words of appreciation to launch this new and very timely volume, which I'm going to share with you here, entitled The Dead as Martyrs, Ancestors and Heroes in Timor-Leste. This collection is edited by my colleagues and good friends, Leah Kent and Feijó, both well-known observers and researchers of Timor-Leste, and I congratulate them and offer my best wishes for seeing this collection in print. Of course, like many others, I would much prefer to participate in the event in Coimbra in person, perhaps with a new book in one hand and a glass of fine red wine from Douro Valley in the other. But unfortunately, COVID put a stop to that idea. And today I'm just going to provide some observations on this most compelling and intriguing of subjects. Hopefully next year at the TLSA, we can all meet in person somewhere. But let me begin by recalling a quote from Damien Grenfell, who's one of the contributors to this text. And he notes that he made the observation that remembering the dead is central to the order of the living in Timor-Leste. And his comment is one, I think, that resonates with most of us who've undertaken research of any length in Timor-Leste, where dealing with the potent dead is a matter of abiding concern and very central, I think, to Timorese society in multiple ways. And I thought I'd just say something about some of those multiple ways. Death gives rise to the ritual and very public channeling of personal grief in the loss of a family member. I suppose that's the most important central element of it. In Timor, it also engages a complex series of mortuary obligations and gifts exchanged between households as a closing cycle of exchange initiated years before, when the deceased married into the final networks of their spouse. And these occasions are important for recognising those connections. And most importantly, death and its attendant rituals are part of a process of creating ancestors, installing them within the ancestral collectivity of the origin group or the house group, and marking the occasion with commensal feasts and prayers. The relationship is a codependent one, where in return for vigilant protection and guidance of the ancestors, the living offer prayers and sacrificial food to sustain their presence in a relationship of interdependence, where the lives and continuity of both the living and the dead are assured. So these aspects of death and mortuary rituals are an integral part of everyday social life in Timor-Leste. But as the editors point out in this new collection, and which they make very apparent here, there are other highly significant and powerful dimensions to the historic dead in Timor-Leste that carry great symbolic and political weight. For years now, ordinary East Timorese have spent considerable time and energy and resources on the rehabilitation of graves, the recovery of human remains and secondary burials of family members who died or disappeared during the national struggle for independence. Whether combatants or ordinary citizens, they are commemorated as heroes and martyrs who suffered and died for the cause. Anthropologist Elizabeth Traub, who has provided an evocative introductory preface to this volume, reiterates her own important understandings on the subject, where she's argued that Timor-Leste is a nation forged in and through the sacrifice of its people, the Pogu, and where the customary ritual leaders and the spirit world for which they care are homologous with the suffering of men and women in the resistance struggle. This idea is a very profound, I think, and common idea across Timor-Leste, which many of us have recognised and which have come together quite nicely in this book. Paralleling these concerns is what the editors describe as the profusion of state-sanctioned efforts to memorialise, recognise and rebury those popularly regarded as heroes of the national struggle. These efforts, they suggest, form part of a process of constructing a new national identity and projecting the legitimacy of the state onto the fabric of the nation. This is a commitment that has directed big budget allocations over decades now to the commemorative cause, and perhaps inevitably has meant that the revered dead, especially those designated as heroes and martyrs, may be manipulated or importuned, I'm suggesting, by the living to obtain certain goals and benefits. But there are also limits to the capacity of the political elites to manage the narratives and sensitivities of ancestral martyrs and heroes. The misguided initiative, for example, to implement a national koremeta and draw a line under the continuing process of honouring the dead was a case in point, and well noted, I think, by the editors, well highlighted that kind of attempt to draw the line under the grieving process was bound to fail, as they point out. Taken together, these entangled processes of life and death in Timor-Leste provide the guiding themes for the volume, one that collectively illustrates what Betsy Traub describes as a thick ethnographic analysis of how death rituals have become a site of struggle in post-independence Timor-Leste, and a contested terrain where participants from different social positions play out overlapping conceptions of past and future. Now, I'll just make a few comments about the structure of the book and some of the contributions to it. It brings together, for me, a pleasing diversity of researchers and localities across Timor-Leste. And in so doing provides an excellent set of comparative perspectives on the intimate and often unsettling relationship between the living and the dead. And it's encouraging to see a number of early career researchers contributing their newer research work included as within the list of authors. And I think it speaks to a continuing attraction of Timor-Leste for new research on multiple fronts, which is, I think, an important result for many of us, I think, who've fostered a kind of research environment in East Timor. And this research on multiple fronts is building a rich archive of valuable documentation on cultural complexities of Timor-Leste society as it charts its post-independence future. And that process, as we know, is an ongoing one. It's suffered some setbacks as it proceeds, but it's produced some, I think, remarkable it's produced some remarkable outcomes over the last 2 decades, more or less, since independence. So, in terms of the structure of the book, following an introductory chapter by Kent and Feijó, which expands and highlights on central topics in question, along with a range of guiding theoretical insights, and it really sort of frames the studies that go come after. The volumes are presented in 3 parts. The first part have 2 chapters, one by Susana Vegas and another by Michael Leach, respectively, who focus specifically on this powerful, effective and symbolic significance of these evocative characters of heroes and martyrs. Both, I think, I mean, in Susana's case, in terms of familial ancestor figures that evoke the national struggle, and from Mike's point of view, the kind of broader nation-building significance of the use of these terms, these potent terms of martyrs and heroes. So that kind of sets the framework, this two-way perspective on the significance of the heroic dead in Timor-Leste. So the second part comprises 6 chapters and explores the continuing influence and power of the dead in everyday life, more or less. The papers are broad in their comparative reach, and they highlight the shared understandings of death and its implications for living communities across multiple language communities, I would say, living people across multiple language communities. Collectively, they bring an impressive ethnographic depth, I suggest, to our understanding of the form and meaning-making that death inspires. And including, for example, I was struck by Soren Blau's chapter on the forensic exhumation of skeletal remains, where there's such an ambiguous range of meanings that the dead produce in what is ordinarily a kind of dispassionate scientific approach. But it shows that the kind of significance placed on death and dead people can defeat the desire for forensic truth. was also struck by Andre Damoleto's paper, which highlights the kind of familial resonance of the deceased across the international border into Indonesian West Timor, among many of the exiled Timor-Leste groups there. The same sorts of issues and commemorative kind of urges are played out also in those communities. The third and final section of the volume shifts the analysis to the complex ways that the symbolic and material qualities of the heroic dead shape what the editors call the imaginings of the state and the nation. 5 chapters in this section address a variety of ways that death and suffering engages a complex politics of valorising the heroic dead by state and non-state actors. So the subject provides fertile grounds for a lively and nuanced scholarly analysis around multiple intersecting themes. Mertonen's work on the gender differences of the martyred dead, for example, and the kind of implications for the invisibility of a lot of women in the heroic struggle. Rothschild's work on human rights and victim justice, and Roll's focus on the material support and flows of benefits to families of sort of authorised heroes, as well as Leah Kent's positioning of the dead as central to regimes of government. And these different papers, different chapters look at the way the state appropriates concepts and the reality of the people who sacrificed themselves and were sacrificed during the struggle to its own purpose of nation building and a kind of channeling the commemorative process in particular ways. So with these few observations, I'm very pleased to launch The Dead as Martyrs, Ancestors and Heroes in Timor-Leste, and I commend the contributors and the editors for their excellent work highlighting the vital and enduring importance of life after death in Timor-Leste and of the dead in the lives of the living. Thanks very much. I hope you enjoy your session today, and I'll sign out now.
Okay, Rui, please. You have we have more 50 minutes to discuss your book, please. Can you lead the way?
Say about the book. Hello?
Yes, we are hearing you.
I'm on. Okay, I think that Andrew and myself, we have said what we have to say about the book. So the book will be published effectively this month. We have sent the last proofreading of the book a few weeks ago, so it's in the pipeline to be printed. Maybe it is already printed. I'm not sure, but it will be effectively available for sale sometime later this month. So if anybody wants to put some questions, I'll be delighted to answer. Nobody wants to know anything else about the book? Oh, everybody's going to buy the book and get well informed about all these issues. So rush to buy the book. You have a discount offer. You have a discount offer for this conference. So don't miss it. Don't miss it.
It's here, right?
Yeah, yeah.
You can download it here, the discount flyer.
You can download the discount flyer. I see that Annie is very attentive. Okay, so if nobody wants to know anything else about this marvelous book, which is going to surprise everybody for its sheer quality, why don't we move into Andrew's book, since he has so generously volunteered to be up so late at night?
Yes, I mean, if nobody wants to ask anything, well, what strikes me is that the book about death speaks more and more about the living, I think, or the living talking about death, right? It's most of all, I don't know, I have to check it out, but it has a lot to do with that, right? What we do and the politics, personal politics, state politics. I'm very puzzled and I'm very interested. I'm going to use the flyer. Discount.
Yeah, I think that whenever we look at that, we are always trying to celebrate life. It's a common theme in many societies that people's ideas of a good death are actually people's ideas of a good life. You know, you have to live a good life in order to have a good death.
Yeah, that's great. A good life. Those who die in the war had a good life, according to the authors.
No, but the survivors must right the wrongs. There's an obligation to right wrongs, and if those who died red deaths, unnatural deaths, violent deaths, did die bad deaths, these things have to be mended. They have to be corrected, and it's up to the survivors to correct what went wrong, because they will suffer if they don't. But anyway, from Kelly Silva to everybody, did anyone in the book discuss the status of dead people for Protestant people in Timor? In a way, yes, because Alessandro Buarcaich discusses people, the Humangili people of Atauro, and so not expressly, but in some ways, he addresses the Catholic Protestant divide in his chapter. But it's not a central theme of his chapter, I'm afraid. But incidentally, yes, it pops up in Alessandro's chapter, which is the first chapter in second part of the book. More questions?
A very simple question. Could someone speak
Your
a little
questions
bit
are never
about the cover?
simple, John.
Very simple. Could someone speak to me about the cover picture, and what that is, whether there is one thing alone like that in Timor, or whether there are multiple such things, and what role they play in this moment in Timor?
Oh yes, the front cover is Leah Kent's photograph. She addresses this issue in her chapter. This particular one is the warehouse where L7 has gathered more than 400 coffins. There are, in some places, committees for the retrieval of human remains for the martyrs of resistance. L7, as you know, Cornélio Gama is with his political party, Underteam, and Sagrada Familia on the other hand, he has been collecting and putting pressure on the state to have a decent burial place, but he disagrees with the official burial places, and so they are entangled in a confrontation. And so he has got this warehouse where he stockpiles about 400 coffins, which is amazing. There are this is interconnected with the idea of the official homages which are paid in the Garden of Heroes, Jardim dos Heróis, in Metinaro, and the Garden of Heroes which have been built in every district and sometimes even at sub-district levels. But again, Timor doesn't have a uniform attitude towards that. In some places, they completely disregard the state-sponsored commemorations. In Lauteng, I deal a bit with that in the case of the death of Afonso Savio and what goes around Afonso Savio. The cemetery in Lauteng is almost empty, and so is the ossuary. They are almost empty. But in other districts, these commissions for the retrieval have come up with literally hundreds of coffins to be buried in the Garden of Heroes. Large hundreds, not small hundreds, but large hundreds. And that is mostly debated in Leah Kent's chapter. You will enjoy reading Leah Kent's chapter, John.
Okay.
Anyone else? Anyone else? Shall I go in countdown?
Can I ask one?
David.
Does the book go into any discussion of what you might call the enemy dead, the Indonesian cemetery in Dili being not too far from CNC? Do you discuss the Indonesian dead, the formerly honored dead?
Not directly, not the cemetery of the war dead in Dili, the Indonesian war dead in Dili. It is mentioned, for instance, in our introduction, that is mentioned. Another thing is that André Damaledo works on the death of the Timorese who live in West Timor. And some of them were autonomists, pro-autonomy people. Some important people were, and what sort of rituals they get, but not directly. There is no chapter on the Indonesian cemeteries in East Timor.
Okay.
I see your point. It's important. We even mentioned in the introduction an information that one of the conditions that the military are supposed to have laid before H.J. Habibie, in order to accept referendum, was that he made sure that the Indonesian cemeteries were kept, that you would get guarantees from the East Timorese that they would not upset the Indonesian cemeteries in Dili, which is quite an interesting point. If you have to raise 3 points, one being what to do with the dead, it's quite amazing. But yes, but unfortunately, well, only this amount of space, and not. We did have the imagination to find someone to write. Maybe you would have volunteered, who knows?
Me, no. No, it's just interesting as you watch the transformation of some of the Indonesian memorials in Dili in particular, that there has not been a transformation of the cemetery, but I guess the agreement on leaving answers why.
That Michael touches upon this transformation of the monuments, in the Indonesian monuments, and how they have been recast. Yes, that's in Michael's chapter.
Thanks. Sounds super interesting.
So, Rui, if there is no other question, we will move on to Andrew's book. Is it okay? Any questions?
Okay, fine. Thank you, everybody. Hope you enjoyed the book when it comes out.
Thank you.
Congratulations.
So, congratulations. So, we are moving now here to post-conflict social and economic recovery in Timor-Leste. Redemptive Legacies from Andrew McWilliam. So, Andrew, please.
Thank you, Lucio. And good afternoon again. I was not, let me say, I wasn't intending to launch the book at this venue. I was really only putting it up as an announcement and an exhibition that the book had been published. But given that you'd allocated some time, I felt it was appropriate that I should at least appear and say something in relation to the book. I'm happy to answer any questions you might have about it as well. So I thought I'd just give you a little bit of background and just a few ideas about what I'm trying to do with this book that's finally come out. I've been working on it for quite some time. And in some ways, it's some of the themes that I talk about resonate with Leah and Rui's book on the dead. The idea of redemptive legacies speaks to this notion of remembering the suffering and sacrifice of those who went before and seeking some kind of atonement through your actions. So that's a kind of sub-theme that runs through the book. But let me just highlight a few features. In some ways, the title is kind of self-explanatory, so that when like many people, when we went to Timor-Leste after liberation, after independence and so on, I think there were two key questions, certainly in my mind. One was to try and figure out what had happened to East Timor in the generation of occupation, of which we heard very little generally. And the second aspect was, what was the future going to look like? I mean, what would the recovery process look like? And so my project, which this book is the kind of culmination in some ways, has been to try and answer those two questions in relation to what I'll call Whataluku ethnography, so that I focus my work largely on Lautem and to some extent Dili, where Whataluku people live and have been active and so on. So I've kind of focused on Lautem to build this idea of what was happening in the recovery phase. This is after the UN had left, after the emergency humanitarian people had left, and the people were pretty much left up to their own devices to try and figure out how to recover their livelihoods, how to recover this sociality that had been so disrupted. And in the process of doing that, over a number of years of persistent visits and so on, one of the things I noticed was that from time to time, a number of young Timorese returned to Lautem, Los Palos, having come back from working overseas, usually on Portuguese passports and so on. And it was a kind of trickle of people. And I'd noticed this, but hadn't taken much notice in terms of my research until about 2008 or 9 or so on, where there was a lot more people leaving on Portuguese passports, traveling to England, where they were working in shift work and factory work over there and sending remittance cash back to their families at home. So at that point, my research project, I felt, had to be reconfigured in some ways, had to be shifted. And it wasn't just about the recovery process in Los Palos or Lautem, but it had to incorporate this new development, it seemed to me, of an expansionary circular labour migration to the UK, which was feeding back into the livelihoods and life of people in Los Palos and Lautem. And it also occurred to me that this was also an integral part of the post-conflict social and economic recovery, this whole new migration process, so that I resolved to kind of expand my research and try and understand this process more clearly. And that involved a number of trips, in fact, to the UK, where I kind of opened up a new a set of research activities, undertaking interviews with people who are living over in the UK. So a number of times I went there in 2012, 2014, I spent some time in Oxford and Northern Ireland, and a number of other places, meeting up with all sorts of people who are all sorts of Whakaluku principally, but all sorts of Timorese people working and living in the UK, to get a sense of the kind of dynamic that was going on at the time. And I've followed that through until the present day. And as a result of that sort of combined research, I came up with two kind of main points, which are also reflected in the book, two chapters really that reflect that. And one is that the reason for the success of this migration, until COVID intervened earlier this year, this process of circular chain migration to the UK has been incredibly popular. And you've seen a kind of siphoning off of a lot of young people out of Los Palos, out of Lautem, using their familial connections and working in the UK, right? Two things have come out of that which have been very striking to me. One has been the role of the internet and social media, which has completely changed the sort of dynamics of labour migration these days. In the past, if people went away, you never heard from them for weeks, months, maybe a very expensive phone call, you could connect with them. But from sort of 2012 and so on, beyond that, these days, communication is instant. Communication through all sorts of platforms, Instagram, Facebook, 24-hour video. People are in touch with one another. And it's meant that in some ways, and I've used different kinds of arguments to try and analyse the process here. The idea being that people are now connected all the time, and so there's a kind of stretching of the sociality of Los Palos and Lautem and Whakaluku people over to England and back and forward like that. And it's enabled people both in the UK to keep in touch with one another as they move around the different towns and cities, working and making lives over there. But it's also enabled them to connect back to East Timor. And the second aspect that I also highlight in the book is this extraordinary flow of remittances as cash contributions to families living at home. And I've worked with my colleague, Carmeneza dos Santos Monteiro, who's helped me do surveys with a number of returned migrants, and also with families of migrants who are working overseas, just to get a sense of the kind of incredible benefits that have flowed from this spontaneous migration process. And that, in many ways, that's been one of the transformational processes. If you go to Lautem or Los Palos these days, it's a transformed place, and it's largely the result of this flow of income that comes from outside, along with, to some extent, the social transfers from government, I acknowledge, pensions and veterans payments and so on. But this flow of money has also fed back into some of the kind of themes that Rui was talking about in some ways. So people have put their money into housing as a primary kind of goal. They've also put their money into businesses. And you notice in Los Palos, the biggest business that's going around has been the house building business. So a lot of people began going out and buying trucks and buying for haulage of sand and building materials and so on. So there's this extraordinary activity going on there, generating income for a lot of people working. And they've also used this money to kind of raise the stakes in commemorative sort of activity, whether it's ceremonial commemoration of marriages or deaths, and also the building of secondary graves or rebuilding of old graves that have been that were hastily done in years gone by. So there's a lot of investment put into a sort of aggrandizement in some ways of mortuary ceremonies and the kind of commemoration of people who died before. So in this book, I'm trying to kind of capture a lot of that in a series of 7 chapters only, and think about in a kind of comprehensive or kind of overall perspective about what it's meant for Whakaluku people in Lautem and Los Palos and so on, what this whole process of the last 2 decades has come to mean in terms of restoring what was a very traumatic period for them, as it was for all people in Timor-Leste, the occupation, and how they've managed through their own efforts largely. One of the things you find, I'll just finish up now, one of the things you find in Lautem is that over the past few years there's been a disinvestment, I think, or there's been at least a kind of economic failure in the part of private investment and government investment in that part of the world as resources are sucked away to the major projects elsewhere. And really the only thing sustaining that part of Timor-Leste has been the flow of remittances from the UK, which amount to, I mean, it's a bit difficult to know exactly, but they're in the sort of $17 to $20 million, had been up until the start of this year, $20 million US, which puts them in a kind of somewhere between the second or third level highest non-oil export sort of industry for Timor-Leste, and one I think that has a long way to grow and a long way to go. But given the current circumstances of COVID, which has shut that down, and also the looming Brexit regulations, which are going to change the game for many of the young Timorese, so there's a question mark. So this book can take us up to that point, and I guess we'll see what happens in the future about whether they can continue and sort of what does happen to this extraordinary connection that Timor has made with the UK, where there's thousands of people still living over there, as far as I'm aware. Yeah, so I urge you, if you have the means, it's not a cheap book, I'm sorry it's not open access, but I'd welcome you to have a read of the book if you get a chance sometime. So I'll leave it there, Lucio.
Okay, thank you. So I will now ask if anyone wants to present any questions, put forward any doubt.
Yes, I have a question, Andrew. Since you're live. Yeah, how are you? I've been waiting for a definitive answer on Brexit and the implications for a lot of your respondents in Northern Ireland and other places in Britain. Is there any indication yet of that?
Not as far as I'm aware. The theory that people were working on up until sort of February was that if you could get into England, get yourself registered, get the national insurance, whatever things you had to, and get a residence, that would probably secure you for the future. But so the risk was that the new ones coming on, if they didn't have those kinds of connections, might be locked out. But it's very difficult to get confirmation because there's no real clear, as far as I know, there's no definitive statements been made on that. My guess is, though, that these Timorese labour migrants, of course, occupy some of the lowest wage occupations, and I don't see that the UK is going to want to get rid of them. I mean, I don't see that the British are going to jump up and say we're going to start doing shift work and packaging supermarket products. So I suspect there's still going to be scope for sustaining their connections there. But I do worry about the new ones and what the new opportunities would be.
About if I can I come?
I can just add to that. I do know that the Timorese who are living and working there, they have been asked or invited to apply for residency, and as far as I know, they all have received residency in the UK if they wanted it.
And is that because they've been there a certain length of time?
Yeah, they've been working there, and their employers have, wanted them to stay, and they can get put in the application.
That's good.
Can I come, Lucio?
Yeah, sure. Go ahead.
The question about Brexit is very curious because if I'm not wrong, most of the Timorese who live in the United Kingdom are there on Portuguese passports.
Yes.
So if they were on Timorese passports, Brexit would be something completely out of their way. It wouldn't matter. But they are Portuguese, and so it matters because Portugal is European Union, and so it's gonna change. It's gonna change quite a lot. The recent news, and I read the Guardian every day, is that they are heading for a non-agreement for so-called hard Brexit. It's not a very good sign for the continuation of good relations between European Union and United Kingdom. Of course, Portugal is trying to build on the oldest Western alliance coming from the late 14th century, but the question, the overall question with Brexit is that what Andrew was saying, what rational is completely outside the picture, because Brexit is not about rationality, it's about irrationality. So I don't think that we might expect rational behavior from Boris Johnson. That's my point. And so beware, Brexit may bring a wave of xenophobia. It has been felt in many places in the United Kingdom, a wave of xenophobia and hatred to the foreigners, which is what is really one of the major arguments for Brexit, is to vote Britain rule the waves. You may have heard the huge polemic that was about last night of the proms. Did you?
Yeah.
The last night of the proms, BBC wanted, they wanted to play Rule Britannia without the lyrics. And there was a public outcry, even in the House of Parliament, forcing them to sing Rule Britannia, Rule the Waves. So the atmosphere in the United Kingdom is not very favorable to East Timorese, be they on Timorese or Portuguese passports, I'm afraid.
I don't know if I had to respond to that, but there's a lot of, everything's local in the UK as well, right? So you can talk about those foreigners, but the people around the corner there, you know them well, and you don't think of them in the same category.
Mm-hmm. Hello? Yes? Comments? I was just watching this here. I came across in the Facebook with some new messages about UK visa exception for East Timorese citizens. They don't need a visa for traveling to UK as tourists, as long as for stay for 6 months.
Really?
Temporary migration Portuguese do this in Switzerland, in places like this. They go for, very limited periods of time there, and these months are enough to earn some amount that do a living here. So I don't know if there is any road here. There are. I think it's a company that is doing this kind of information, but this was a Timorese who make this information. So Mika wants to say something. I will give it. Please do.
Oh, boa noite, bom dia.
Mika.
Hi, Mika.
I have 2 questions. First, I would like to know your book also make a comparison between the districts of Timor-Leste. I know that people talk about a lot of Los Palos people, many people who migrate there, many of them are Los Palos, but I wonder you have data in terms of other districts as well. And the second question about the sense of attachment, after they migrated, some of them bring their family, they settle there, whether they consider that new place as a home for them for the future of their life, or it's like a temporary thing for them that eventually they will come back. Timor is still their sort of home for them. They go there just to find some income, and then they will come back here and then build their life here, basically. I wonder your book also talks about parts.
Okay, obrigado, Mika. Good to see you. It's true, I focused on Whakaluku mainly because it seems to me they were the sort of pioneers of this whole flow of people, flow of Timorese to the UK. And one of the reasons this was the case was that in order to secure it was about securing the passport. It was quite difficult early on to get a Portuguese passport. Even though if you could do it, you needed people in Lisbon to facilitate the process. That's my understanding. And it just happened that there were Whakaluku people in Lisbon who were willing to do that and were supporting their relatives first. And so, and it was a very secretive kind of thing. People kept it, kept the knowledge quiet. So it took quite a while for it to sort of open out. And over time, they can now get visas, passports through the embassy in Delhi. And it's an easier process now. So you're getting many more people going, or you were. But by and large, I argued that it was maybe over 40, but half the people were Whakaluku who were going to the UK, just because they got this early start and that you get this sort of momentum through the chain migration. But I've met people from all over. I've met quite a lot of Indonesian Timorese who have got Portuguese passports as well. And there's been sort of tensions in the UK over these different groupings as well. The pro-Indonesian and the pro-independence, that's also come out, the politics in UK. So I don't have full details on exactly how many people from Timor-Leste are going. Mostly they're going from Dili if they're coming from other language communities. They're not really coming from the districts, although Balkau has more. Balkau has quite a few people going. But from the West, not so much. On the other point, do they think it's home? And I think there's this wonderful kind of classic migrant experiences there that for young people who are going for the first time, they really just want to go and earn money, save enough and come back 2 or 3 years, And then what happens is they come back, they're living for a while, they fix up their house, it looks great, and then there's no job, there's no money, so they go back again. So it turns into a circular kind of process of working for a while in England, coming back, living in Timor-Leste, back to England, working. People do that. But there's also been this very strong process and practice I've seen where, because mostly the migrants are male, probably only 10% are females who go on their own independently, but the guys go. And then because of this internet explosion I talked about, there's a lot of relationships that start up online, Facebook, whatever. And I've seen a lot of hookups, you might say, long distance, where people also marry, do these arrangements online, get organized, people come back for holiday, they have their marriage, sort of minimal marriage ceremonies, and then they take their wife back to Timor, back to UK. There's been quite a lot of these marriages through the media. But once you're in the UK, the key element, of course, like all migrants, is if you have children. So if you have children in the UK, as much as you'd love to go back to Timor-Leste, and everyone talks about, oh, I just want to go back, I just want to go home. Once you've got children and they're in school, you can't go back. People say, well, we're just waiting till the children grow up, then we'll go back for sure to Timor-Leste. But who knows if they will, and who knows if the children will, because it then becomes, it's not the place they know, it's the place their parents come from. So I think you'll see a thing where second generation UK-born Timorese children will not have the same links. They're not coming back to live in Timor, but they will maintain the connections, I think. For others, for the people who are single, they'll come back, I suspect. Or they may or may not. Some stay a long time. But so it's a difficult one to answer, but it's a complex kind of thing to see. But I think it relates to just the dynamics of migration, and it's not special to Timorese. It's the nature of migration, I think. If you stay long enough, you don't go back. And it's like when you come back to Dili, no one really goes back to live in Los Palos. Some people do, but mostly you don't. You live in Dili. that's the way of it everywhere, I think.
Thank you.
Okay, so any more questions? We are reaching our 1 hour plan. Well, if there is any other question, so we will stay here, and I would like to thank very much to Feijó and Andrew McWilliam for coming to present their books, and it's been a great and exciting hour here, and we really would like to have the books at hand, but we don't have it, but we hope we can do it one day.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, yes.
Good. I didn't know how it
Nadine,
works.
yes.
Okay.
Yes,
hello,
please
so,
go ahead.
First of all, thank you very much for this presentation. I thought it was very interesting. I have a very specific question, and I don't know if it's a little bit out of the context because I understand it's a direct migration thing. But I was wondering in chapter 5, in the distant ancestors and Facebook families, do you also consider metaphorical narratives of younger and elder brothers? And is this a thing regarding the UK, like from Timor-Leste to migrate to the UK?
Well, it's a good question. I don't specifically use the kind of metaphor of, they say, nokokaka, of Maunalin kind of imagery, although in practice, of course, the older ones go first. So, you know, there is that practice where the older brother goes, the younger brother follows. And there's also a very strong linkage between the older brother taking the responsibility for contributing to the younger one's education. So I haven't thought about it in a kind of mythic way or metaphoric way, but in a literal way, there certainly are obligations surrounding the relationship between siblings, yes, of course, and to parents. But thanks for that question. It's interesting.
Thank you very much.
It's like the older one and the younger one. It's interesting. Sorry. So, anyone else? Any other question? Yeah, well, if not, I want to thank you everyone to joining us in our first book lunch. Tomorrow we will have another session of book lunch after the panels. So please do join us at, well, in Portugal it's 8 o'clock in the morning, in East Timor is 4 o'clock in the afternoon, and well, etc., etc. So please see your schedule, but do join us. And for this afternoon and night, please check out the platform and see the forums. People are putting their the coordinators are putting stuff, other materials, etc. Please do contact us. So once again, and to Andrew McWilliam and to everyone who joined us. Thank you very much, and see you tomorrow.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Parabéns, Lucio.
Parabéns.
Okay, you are welcome.
Parabéns,
You're welcome.
Andrew. Congratulations.
Thank you. Good night. Good day.
Good night.
Yes.
Good
Good
night.
afternoon. I'm going to take lunch after all.
Obrigada, Lúcio.
Bye. Bye-bye.
Ciao, ciao.